Hi, good evening, folks. Let me adjust my levels here. Right, how are y'all? Thank you so much for showing up this Friday evening. I know that with the state of emergency over, finished, and done with, there's so much more that you could be doing with your Friday evening. So, those of you that making the effort to join me on a Friday evening, thank you so much for joining me this evening. So, hi, Pauline. Hi, Mervyn. How are you doing? Nice. So, this evening we're going to be talking about work. We're going to be talking about the workspace. Hi, Fabian. Hi, Hazel. Hi, Veronica. Hi, Janelle St. Omer. I see we have St. Omer's in the house already. So, good evening, folks. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Carla. I see Vonnet is here. Vonnet, you missed the trailer, girl. Nobody lived here for the trailer. Right, so this evening is meant to be a follow-up. A couple weeks ago, we would have had organizational analyst Kathleen Stroud talking about workspaces and toxic behavior in workspaces. And I wanted to have a follow-up conversation. I wanted to be able to talk about human resource management, especially in this pandemic era, this pandemic time period, and how we are navigating the world of work. And also I wanted to look at new approaches to work, especially given that we have a dichotomy here of the public sector and the private sector. And I started looking around for somebody suitable to have a conversation with, and realized that the person was in my backyard the entire time. I have a very good Facebook friend. Her name is Cavelle Joseph-Omer. And I only realized in the last couple of months that Cavelle is a HR hefe. So she's worked with the National Training Agency, she's worked with Udicot, and recently she became the president of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm going to bring her on screen, and she's going to be joining me. Hi, how are you doing, my dear?
Hi, Rhoda. I'm good. Hello to all your viewers.
Right, so we're on, and let me just shift this a little bit. Good, right. So we all set and sorted to go. So Cavelle, the first thing I want is for the audience to know just a little bit about you, so they know who is this lady that I'm speaking with here. You know, apart from the fact that you're incredibly well put together and articulate, I want them to know who is Cavelle Joseph and what have you done with respect to human resource management? Because I know you've been in the area for about 20 years, right?
Yes, 20 years as a practitioner, graduating since 2000 from the University of the West Indies. I had my bachelor's in economics and law, and Rhoda, I did not start off wanting to be an HR practitioner, by the way. I started off pursuing law. Most people don't know that, and I have an economics degree, but is entering my family's business and trying to set up an HR department in my family's business. I fell in love with HR and pursued HR in terms of when I pursued my master's and then my international certification and my diploma in industrial relations.
What did you fall in love with about HR?
Well, to be honest, I do enjoy developing, seeing people grow and develop. Anybody who knows me know that about me, that I like to at least mentor and coach and help people along the way. And in doing HR, especially my family's business, recognizing that there was no structure and systems in place led me to now utilizing the legal background, because I started off, as I said, doing law, doing employment contracts, setting up a full structure to a department, and that is what, seeing the difference that made in my family's business led me to now fall in love with HR. And then I pursued my master's, and the rest is history. So I accidentally fell in love with this career, to be honest.
So HR is something that I have, I have a very cloudy idea about what it is. The only time I get in touch with HR at my place of work is when my contracts have to be renewed, and I guess if I've got to apply for things like leave. So I don't really have a regular, I guess, I don't have regular contact with human resource. With the human resource department, and my human resource department will be dealing up with an entire university campus and having to also be have, I guess, like an articulate policy alongside the other two campuses, or the other three campuses, sorry. So my question at this point is, tell me, what exactly does HR do?
Well, based on what you've described, it sounds to me your department is very transactional and not necessarily strategic. The elements you've described is more the transaction, ensuring that contracts are in place,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that leave is processed. So it's what we would have called personnel management many, many years ago. HR has evolved over the years to be a little bit more strategic, and HR has a place, at least in organization that see it as a strategic function, has a place at the table in the boardroom
Mm-hmm.
where decisions about the future of the organization is being made. So HR is involved first and foremost in strategy and strategy development. And if ever you hear an organization is developing a corporate strategy and does not have HR in the room, then you know that strategy will be flawed, because every aspect, even if you're looking at diversifying into a new form of business, it has an impact on the people. It's people that drives the business. It's the
Mm-hmm.
people that has to ensure that the success of this vision and the strategy is achieved. So therefore, anything that affects people in the workspace is HR related. So if we look at it from a functional perspective, then you have, okay, recruitment and selection, employee engagement, employee relations, compensation and benefits, training and development. Now we call it learning and development.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer training, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the list goes on from a functional perspective. But first and foremost, it is strategic, and HR has to be involved in major corporate decisions, or it should be involved in major corporate decisions that are being made about any organization that is forward thinking.
So, in many organizations outside of the human resource department, you'll have persons thinking and saying, so I want you to respond to this obviously, that HR really is there to benefit the employer and not the employee. And so I guess it protects the interests of the employer rather than protecting the interests of the employee. Now, what you've just explained there in terms of being more strategic, to me, if it's done in the manner in which it's meant to be done, it ought to be looking at and protecting and serving the interests of both sides. So, how does HR protect and serve the interests of the employee?
But the thing is, HR is smack in the middle, as you've rightly identified, with managing the interests of the employer, the business interests, and that of the employees. But for good business, it is obvious that in taking care of your workers and having not necessarily, you're not going to get 100% of a happy workforce, but ensuring that the basic things that a worker or an employee is interested in and needs to actually function and to function effectively is taken care of. So it's balancing the interests of both sides. It's not for the employer, it's not for the employee, but really trying to balance both interests for the benefit of everyone. And to me, if if it's more unison in terms of bringing parties together, because we all have a common interest in the success of an organization, or we should have that common interest, because our very livelihoods depend on it. So to me, any employee would want to see a business, should not want to see a business fail. It shouldn't want to sabotage a business or want to see a business fail, because at the end of the day, your standard of living, your quality of life, everything is connected to this business. In terms of our jobs are an intrinsic part of who we are. Most of the time, when people introduce themselves, Rhoda, they will say, "This is Rhoda Barrett, lecturer at the University of the West Indies. This is um, Mikey. He is an engineer with so so so. This is John." You know, if you hear how just from that simple thing, it says to us that what we do is an intrinsic part of who we are as people. So therefore, the company that you're employed with, you would want to see that company succeed and grow and develop, because it should redound to the workers in the end. Because once business decisions are made in the interest of that business,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of everybody coming with the same agenda, the same unified vision, mission, committed to the objectives and goals of this organization, then we will all be working towards seeing this thing succeed. So when you have this divide, that can never be a healthy situation for any organization. We all should be working together towards the success of this business.
Good. So now I'm going to ask some questions that would be very basic, but can be also a little bit on the existential side. How are we defining work? Like, what is work?
Well, work is, I mean, it is literally a mixture of the physical thing that you do when you're contractually engaged. That employment contract will say to you, we are hiring you and we're hiring you as the human resources manager, and this is your job description, and this is what we expect of you. So it defines what we expect of you. A good job description will define the level of competency expected to perform at, and what the expected performance levels are in terms of this particular job. So work is actually what we do. We leave our homes every day to go, and it can be very physical in nature. It may require a lot of thinking depending on which level you are in an organization. But it's really people coming together, doing physical and intellectual work to get whatever the objective of an organization is, to get that done, to get the business objectives done, basically, and that is us coming together in the workplace. You
So,
know,
so then, what's a workplace, or what is the workplace? And I'm asking that too because for me, in the last, was it 18 months, 20 months, however many months, it seems to me that how I'm defining work and how I'm defining the workplace has really changed. So, how do we define a workplace?
well, it's essentially as basic as the physical place, the actual physical location. And we know that location has changed, right? And it has changed significantly with the pandemic. But it's literally the place that we all get together under the direct control, because that's essentially what it is. When we are in the workplace, we now contractually obligated to our employer. So it's under the direct control and supervision of our employers. That is essentially what it is. And depending on the nature of your job, the workplace could be a vehicle for a driver, for example, a lorryman, a courier. That includes when you're in the vehicle driving because you're working at that point in time. And that's why a number of there's a lot of legality around defining the workplace when it comes to injury and things like that, when something should happen that is a bit negative. So for a driver, it could actually take you on the road. For someone on a construction site, the work now includes the work site. For somebody traveling and going away to do work, that flight is all part of the work. So it says anything in the pursuit of the interest of your employer, that space, that space that you come to do that, to perform that task, that is the workplace.
Now, in the last, from March to now, my workplace has essentially become the desktop that I'm looking at you on here, or my laptop. That's where I'm working. So I can pretty much be anywhere physically. And once I open that up and I log on and I go onto a platform, that's my workplace. And I guess for me, I'm now thinking about how do I navigate that space, and how do I get my employer to make that space be as comfortable and as safe for me as possible. So I don't know. I know that, I'm not saying that IT is your background, but looking at what you've just said, or with given your understanding of the workplace and the employer's responsibility where the workplace is concerned, people who are now working virtually, working remotely, what responsibilities, if any, does the employer have with respect to that virtual space?
And therein lies a serious challenge for most employers, because with the work from home, it means certain liabilities are transferred now that is not within the control of the employer anymore. Remember, when you come physically to my building, I have a duty of care. I have a duty to make sure the space is safe, to make sure, there are certain duties in law that is incumbent on me. Now that that liability has shifted, it's almost like a transfer of risk has occurred. And now that risk is taken on by you, the employee, because now you have to ensure that lighting is proper in your office, in your home office, right? That you have the appropriate chair, the appropriate desk, that you have the necessary security measures, because you spoke about the virtual world. Remember, when an employee now is working from home, It means just like how we are on this call right now, we have to ensure that employees understand while conducting the company's business, conversations around that company's business is not heard by somebody who shouldn't be hearing it in the first place because we're not certain of the privacy around the workspace at home that has now shifted to home, right? It means if there's an accident or an incident at home, and you happen to damage your hand, will you now come and say it's because I was working on this laptop at home and I didn't have the right desk? That is now the employer's fault, right? So it's a lot of liability and risk that has shifted as a result of this. And a number of employers, at least the ones that I know that I've interacted with, they have actually consulted with the insurance companies to discuss the whole concept of workman compensation in a virtual workspace because it means now that you now have to redefine the workspace and have coverage for that. It happened in construction, so it was something that was covered because project managers work on site and all of that. But now that you have this shift that has occurred, it means even how you insure your workers and the value of that insurance will have to adjust to accommodate those risks that has now transferred.
Do you think it would be useful then for companies that are shifting towards or at least utilizing virtual work and work from home arrangements that they have policies in place with respect to what kind of, let's say, what kind of hardware, software, and the other ergonomic issues that their employees should have to be able to execute work properly, efficiently?
Most definitely, Rhoda. And if you were to examine even within the COVID period on an international level, how many security breaches we saw, how many companies were hacked. So it happened in the US, Russia versus America, with the oil and gas and what happened then. And it's the same thing with what's happening now with your IT systems and your access to your servers now having you now have to grant VPN access to employees who are no longer physically in your workspace. You now have to allow them to take home documents. They may even have to now put information on a disk and take it home. There's a risk of your information entering a space that it ought not to be, right, and becoming public. So it means your policies and procedures have to now cover this new environment. It means that non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements have to be tight. It means that in terms of company data, you have to have tight policies around how you use company data and information, copyright information, issues around assets of the company. So your laptops, the phone devices, headsets, anything that you give to an employee to accommodate the new work environment, you have to have policies to cover the usage of those devices. So that, for example, an employee comes to you and says, "Oh, we had a break-in over the weekend. They stole the laptop. They stole the company phone." The policy must be clear in terms of where the liability will now fall. That the employee must be aware in signing on to receive this laptop and this phone that should the laptop be stolen, lost, be destroyed due to your negligence, what's the policy around that? Whether you have to repay, whether the replacement cost is on you or not, they need to know these things. Then you have to have the workplace guidelines. Now, when work from home happened, we saw very funny videos in the beginning with people in pajamas. A video with the guy who got up and he was in boxers and he forgot the camera on. Even things like dress codes for virtual meetings and even logging on times and connecting with the company still because you have to ensure people are still engaged and connected to the organization. It's almost like the longer you get, even in listening to you, and you've adjusted to this work from home, it might be even harder to get you back out on campus or get you to a
It's
physical
impossible.
space.
It's impossible.
Right.
I'm putting it out there now. It's impossible. If they want me back on the physical campus, there has to be very, 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 very attractive inducement to get me
So
back on the
yeah.
physical space.
So there you have it. So again, so it's a number of guidelines now you have to put in place from as simple as dress code or what may appear to be simple to as complex as assets and how we treated assets to even performance assessment and how we now continue to monitor performance during this time as well too. A number of managers now had to learn how to manage staff in a hybrid system
So
for those of us who had.
let's talk about
Yes.
that because I think
Yes.
one of the biggest challenges the public sector had in this pandemic, once we hit into once we got into work from home, and we got into work from home from last year, from the time we did the shutdown. Remember, the prime minister would have announced how, whatever percentage of public sector workers had to be home, and you had to be rotating persons, then flexi, and then allowing the PSs to come up with policies, then 50% of the public sector back out, and then determining who was essential workers versus who were less essential or non-essential workers. Those kinds of things took place. But I felt, and certainly the prime minister himself came out in press conferences and talked about how the public was underserved by the public sector because work from home was not as efficient, was not being executed as efficiently as possible. So in a situation like that, where you've made that transition, whether it's overnight or whether it is planned, what kinds of strategies and systems would you suggest be put in place so that people can manage their workforce and also manage the delivery of tasks, the execution of tasks, and the delivery of goods and services in a productive fashion?
Well, I'll start off by saying this. The work ecosystem is made up of four things, right? You have technology, you have the physical place of work, you have the space that you work in, and then you have talent. And COVID impacted all of this. And we have to remember it's called novel for a reason. This was new, and it came like I mean, although we know in 2019, we saw what was happening in China. We saw it move across the globe, so we knew it was coming, right? But in terms of our managers and our organizations being in a position to actually manage effectively, especially at the beginning of this journey called COVID-19, it required a lot of learning. So, in all fairness to a number of managers and organizations out there, they had to adjust, and they had to adjust very quickly, Rhoda. So, it means understanding what new systems you have to put in place. Remember, a number of organizations, for example, especially when you look at the public service, and there's a dichotomy between the public service and the private sector. Public service and the distribution, as simple as laptops, right? As simple as that may seem, predominantly, especially depending on the level, the position that you have in an organization, you wouldn't have a laptop. You would have a desktop. So if you're saying to me 50% of us now have to work from home, and we don't even have a laptop, and our job requires us to type, it requires us to communicate, and that is the way, the tool, that's the tool that we use, then how are we to effectively perform without that device? So it meant buying physical, literally having to purchase a set of devices now and all of
Hardware,
that, right?
yes. A lot of
Right?
hardware
As
had to be
simple as
purchased.
that. Then VPN access. And who do you grant, and the permissions that are required around that to access the server and the data. And the public service structure is a little bit different, and the rules of engagement in the public service is very different, and it's obvious reasons. People may say it's archaic, it may seem bureaucratic, but it's that way for a reason, to protect, because of the volume of data and the kind of information passing through the service. But the public service wasn't ready from a technology perspective. And then you had the talent part of it in terms of managers, PSs, all of them being equipped and ready to manage and lead in such a in a hybrid situation like this. The whole service is designed for you to come physically to the workspace, for you to be at the ministry or the state entity, as the case may be. Private sector evolved a little bit faster and a little bit differently as well too, right? And naturally so, it will have a difference. So in fairness to what evolved, and we can understand why, as a result of the learning and trying to put these things in place while battling a pandemic, and I think people feel managing COVID is an easy task. It isn't. HR practitioners are tired. So in the middle of having to put in these systems in place, you have to monitor. You have to monitor who tests positive, who have to go into quarantine. There's a lot of transactions around that as well, and keeping track of that as well. Tracking when they have to return, when they need a test, So that's one element of it. And that happened in the public service just the same. So we can't expect the same service of delivery to occur while managing all these moving parts. Bearing in mind, it's the same resources. We didn't get additional resources to work with. It's the same workforce, have to keep business functioning and operating, have to now deal with the pandemic and put in all these systems. The workspace shifted to accommodate. We had to physically change your workspace as well, recognizing besides the sanitation stations, the shields that have to go up, the 6 feet apart, so desks and chairs and all that had to be removed. There were offices that went the modern way of open floor plans, but that would not have worked in this time. So it's a number of things they had to put in place while trying to deliver service to you. So I can understand why there will be a drop in service delivery. Whether it should be happening now, because we've all learned, we've all adjusted. So at this stage, we should be a little bit more efficient and effective at it. But in the beginning, it would have been an unrealistic expectation, knowing that we were all learning and trying to put things and systems in place, policies, procedures in place, and knowing fully well too that the public service is a unionized environment. So a lot of things, remember, the unions in terms of negotiations is not only terms but conditions of work. So with us trying to facilitate and facilitate work, facilitate while you were getting paid, all these different factors, you have a union who, when you bring them to the table, they're not really agreeing with you on a number of things or in new initiatives you're trying to roll out. And we know with a collective agreement, if we don't agree or we cannot at least have a memorandum of understanding to at least cease on some of the articles in that collective agreement, then how is an employer now to introduce any kind of measures like that, especially public service,
Well, I'm going
the
to ask
private
you,
sector?
I want to ask you this. In your interactions and dealings with unions and unions as an HR practitioner, have you do you get the impression that unions are up to speed with current negotiation practices? Are trying to say it as diplomatically as possible, and because I don't want to compromise you. All right, there are other ways that I would ask the question. I don't want to compromise you. So, have you gotten the impression that unions are up to speed with 21st century negotiation practices, as well as the 21st century workspace?
I'll be honest and say the unions have a lot. They need to invest in developing the talent in the unions themselves in terms of what is expected of a 21st century union. Long gone are the days, and we could understand why unions were important at one point in time, right? If you look back on history, you could see why
Oh
it was
no,
necessary,
unions
right?
are very important, and
Yes.
what they did for the worker and the laborer from the early 1900s come down. I don't have issues with that. I just
Yeah.
feel as if the way in which they have negotiated for the last 40 years or so, and the ways in which they have defined what ought to be remuneration needs to evolve, because to me there's
And
tangible remuneration and there's
correct.
intangible remuneration.
Correct. And I could draw on past experiences as you've raised that. The unions are not very current, and I think they should all invest in educating themselves, right? From as simple as financial statements. We have tripartite boards. The last organization that I was employed with, the board was tripartite. So you have access to information about the organization, the financial position of the organization. And to me, you should learn to read financial statements first and foremost, to understand if what you're asking of an organization is even realistic in the first place, right? When I started negotiations for the first time with that organization, they asked for 25%, and I was confused by this 25% because at the end of the day, the organization could not have afforded it. And it led to a lot of back and forth with the negotiations. So my strategy was, and I'd use myself, because you brought up a very valid point with tangible versus intangible. And honestly, there are other things that employees do want. Employees want childcare solutions in the workplace, right? And they want flexibility in terms of how work is done, especially for single mothers, right? They want a different type of parental leave, because right now, and don't even get me started on maternity leave versus the concept of parental leave, right? And introducing paternity leave into collective agreements. There are collective agreements that don't have this and don't recognize that a father plays a role in a child's life. So there are intangible things that you could actually access, things for learning and growth and development of the workforce. And you can hold off on the percentages for now. We are not saying that employees don't deserve increases, but at the same time, try and understand the financial position of an organization as well too. So at least 25% cannot be what you're looking for. It cannot be a realistic expectation. Needless to say, in that negotiation, I was successful at getting the unions to sit and review every single article and improving the article in the collective agreement. And we eventually settled on a figure much less than 25% in the end, because what you also have to do is massage your staff as well too. Most of the time, remember, unions representing staff, but they don't necessarily come and communicate and find out from the staff what they actually want. They enter into that space without even meeting with the group collectively and saying, okay, we're starting negotiations for you, tell us what you all would like to see. They start off from a position that they know what you want, so there's no dialogue, right? At least I knew with that organization, that is what occurred. So one of the strategies utilized was crisis management meetings, where you actually meet with the staff to diffuse situations before it escalates to the point where you have to bring in the union as represented by the executive to come into your organization now to cause disruptions in your organization. So, but you're quite right in terms of the unions now not catering for the 21st century employee, not even recognizing that you no longer have a worker who wants to stay in your organization for 25 and 30 years. That is just the reality. That was something our grandparents did, right? Employees looking for something different. The new generation of worker want to get a sense of your corporate social responsibility, work-life balance. What are you doing as an organization to improve the environment? This is a change in the workforce. So it's not only about percentage. They want to be able to have some flexibility. They want to be able to learn. They want to be able to grow, but not necessarily stay with you for 20 or 30 years. So if you want to hold on to that philosophy because you're concerned about dues and their membership and all of that, then you have to now understand the workforce has shifted, and to accommodate that shift with a different thinking, a different philosophy around what employees really want. And you would find that they will be successful with certain category of workers, but there's a category of workers who are quite capable of negotiating for themselves. They're quite capable of telling you what it is they want out of this relationship called the employment relationship. So they don't need someone to come and speak on their behalf, because you have a new empowered workforce as well. It's a very different time.
Have you encountered a significant amount of employees like that who are not necessarily union represented, but they are representing themselves within the workspace and negotiating their terms and conditions?
Yes. And you'd find it more at middle management and executive management level, more middle management. And I've encountered employees who are members of the union and have a problem with the union, but they have their membership as a backup, as a safety net, recognizing that should the unions actually be successful in all that they request, there's a benefit to them somehow, but they don't necessarily support or agree with the union's approach. And it's to get more employees like that to help influence the conversation in that entire movement called the trade union movement. Now, you do have some good leaders, some leaders that think a little bit differently, but they're in the minority. There's a lot that in the traditional way, they come with a blowhorn and they make a certain noise and they want to palm up the table. I remember my first negotiation and I just got up and I walked off. There's no way we're having a meeting and you pounding a table. It's disrespectful. So until we recognize that respect must be served at the table, in addition to which we both need each other. If we don't successfully come to an agreement, it delays your members getting any kind of benefit. And if this had to go to the industrial court, it makes it even worse. So let us come to the table with the true intent, with a pure heart and the true intent for why we came together in the first place. So to me, it's a no-brainer, because if the organization, based on what you're clamoring for, and we've seen it in the ArcelorMittal case, right? Where you ask and they push to the point that the company close. right? When they're telling you they can't afford it. So let us now look at an alternative way. You've seen it in other organizations. I mean, Petrotrin is a little bit more complex, but you could see again the union's involvement sometimes in terms of what they were asking for and the organization's ability to pay. That is a real factor as well.
So I want to talk about, as we're talking about unions and labor unions, I want to discuss this. When I was working on the physical campus, I was literally working on a plantation. It used to be a plantation back in the day. And I've often joked that there have been pretty colonial attitudes towards work, not just on the campus, but generally, right? We tend to have this idea that the manager is like an overseer, and you're keeping a very close eye on people showing up to work, not necessarily doing the work, but showing up to work. So I was wondering, are there any new approaches to management of staff and management of human resource that we should be aware of?
Well, most certainly, because that approach also will not work with the new generation of workers. It just won't. And Rhoda, it's the first time in human history we have so many generations still in the workplace, right? Because you do have um, you do have mature people still in the workplace on contract
So
and all of that.
we have the boomers, we
Yes,
have the baby boomers,
yes.
we have myself. I am, I think, Generation
Generation
X.
X.
Right. So
Yes,
we have
Generation
right. We have
X.
the baby boomers, we have Generation X, we have
Generation Y
Generation Y, we have millennials, we have
and Generation
and
Z.
Generation Z. Right. I think there might be a
Right?
generation in there that I've missed, but
So you have five generations in the workplace.
okay.
Never in our history has this happened, right? And therefore, it's different interests that you're managing as well. And there are those of a particular generation that know that style of management and it's the only style they know. And it's trying to now strike a balance between wanting to see me physically every day, see me by the computer, and I could be most present and not productive. Presenteeism is a real thing, right? So, but that generation, that was their concept of control and managing a workforce, recognizing that the concept of controlling and recognizing now more than ever, you have to allow, when you hire an expert or you hire people, you have to give them some flexibility and have some trust in their ability to deliver on why you engage them in the first place without having to hover over them, without having to see them physically in the workspace as well too. But we do have a cultural issue here as well, recognizing that our culture and our history as it relates to what is it, Trinidadians are Trinidadians.
Yes.
So, right. So at the end of the day, you have workers, you have employees who an employer may give you the trust, and then because of your behavior, and we have the Peter pay for Paul and Paul pay for all
We do.
concept, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
one employee now was seen on the beach in Maracas instead of working from home as agreed on a working day. And as a result of that, a whole policy is changed, or everybody to come back into the workspace as a result of that.
Yes.
So it's really, and again, it's because you have so many generations, you have that kind of influence in terms of the style, the leadership styles that exist. So, whereas the new generation would prefer a more collaborative approach, more consultation and engagement, opportunities to contribute to decisions, right? As opposed to a top down approach where I am directing you and you just have to follow the instructions. And that is what is causing clashes between the generations because there's two different styles that are existing, or I should say several different styles that are existing that cause a clash now. And that's why this new generation, they're not staying for it. They're not, I guess the older generation spoiled this generation to the point where they feel they can walk off a job and be at home and be comfortable still. There was a time that was not possible, right? So around for an abusive employer, for an employer that does not give them the opportunity to actually function as they should or to contribute as they believe they should, who does not serve respect at the table, they will leave. That's the reality. And what is the cost now? It's a higher turnover. It means more work for HR because we now have to engage in recruiting and selecting all over again, right? It tells a particular story about an organization that is not necessarily a good one because you can almost describe it as a toxic workplace if you have a high turnover, people consistently leaving your organization, and it's connected to the leadership style that exists in the organization as well. HR practitioners now have to be a lot more skillful. Now, because we smack in the middle and we interact with upper management.
Mm-hmm.
Upper management may deliver a message to us, and in the middle of that message, Ruda, it might have some industrial language. It may have all sorts of things in that message. But when we leave that room, we are not to deliver the message in the same way we received it. We have to nicely polish it, make the message nice and colorful, and pitch it and sell it and own it like if it's ours, right?
Yeah.
But some practitioners are not that skillful. So they will come out of the room and say, Mr. So and so say so, 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 and exactly the way it was said.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that now creates, all of that contributes. And as practitioners, we're often called upon to be psychologists. It's so many roles, so many hats HR play in an organization
Mm-hmm.
because you have to know you're the recipient. You get the full blow of everything. You get it.
Yeah.
Most people don't know
I
it.
no, I can see that because
Yes.
there's a question I want to ask you here, Cavell. You made the point about toxic workspaces. You made the point about having to, you are speaking to upper management and then you have to craft things for the rest of the organization. What do you do in a situation where upper management has given you a directive that is in and of itself toxic or could lead to toxicity in the workspace? How does HR handle something like that? Or how does HR mitigate against something like that?
Well, the thing is, there's a difference between an instruction that might be illegal
Mm-hmm.
and unethical and immoral that
Mm-hmm.
will hit you to the core of your being. And most practitioners will draw the line on those things. I know practitioners who've resigned because of those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there are instructions. It may be difficult to execute. You may not be comfortable with it, but it is not illegal. It is not immoral. It is just not consistent with the company's policies. It doesn't create equity and fair play in the workplace. It's a number of other issues then, right? It must favoritism or nepotism. It might be something else that is not necessarily an illegal thing that is happening. So now you find a way to advise the organization on why we shouldn't probably take this approach, or you find a way to legitimize the instruction now. So you get an instruction
Mm-hmm.
and you figure out within the policies, within the rules that exist, how to legitimize it and bring it into the rules and the systems that exist so that at the end of the day, on the face of it, to Joe Public, it's something that legitimately occurred, right? You're faced with it all the time. And some organizations are more challenging than others. And it just requires you now skillfully recognizing that you have to support the executive decisions that are being made,
Mm-hmm.
try and understand the rationale for it, because sometimes decisions are made that you don't necessarily understand the reason why. Depending on the relationship you have with the executive, it will be shared. If you don't have that relationship, it will be unknown to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to there's always a reason behind decisions as well, just the same. You may not have all the information, but your role is also to support it and to package it the best way you can. But when it's something illegal, and I faced that a couple years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where the instruction was definitely one that I could not carry out, and I had to push it back to the CEO, and we were back and forth in a paper game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth, this thing was going because I was not signing it. And eventually, that CEO signed the document. And if I have to tell you, every single employee who got that correspondence went to an attorney and they brought a collective case against the organization and dropped it. And I knew that is what will happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at least I told myself my name is not on the document. I didn't sign off on it because I knew it was wrong and it would have caused a backlash. The company eventually had to rescind, right? Especially knowing who the attorney was as well too.
Mm-hmm.
So they backtracked on the decision. But that was some years ago. That period of my career and my life is what strengthened me as a practitioner, actually, because it was the most testing period of my career that I've ever encountered. Prior to that experience, I've worked with some incredibly fantastic people. So I think the universe had to now tell me, Cavell, this is not really the real will, There's a dark side to organizations that you must know.
Mm-hmm.
So I experienced it, I learned it, so that now I can navigate through it skillfully. Thankfully, I don't exist in that kind of environment anymore. But it taught me some powerful lessons. And I did get one of those instructions. And I think every practitioner will find themselves at some point where some kind, it happens in family businesses, especially where the owner of a business get up one day and decide they want to fire someone for whatever reason, and you have to find a way to execute that. It happens all the time. HR is placed in that position.
And so I find that, those are some of the distinctions to me between private sector and public sector. In public sector, you can't just get up in the morning and decide to fire a person. You have many channels to go through, and sometimes so much paperwork that it doesn't even make sense to try to fire the person. So then what they will do is passive aggressively frustrate the person so that the person looks to transfer out or whatever. Still toxic, still unhealthy. But within private sector businesses, or as you identified, family businesses, how do you mitigate against something like that?
You can't. I mean, that's just me being honest.
No, it is. And listen, it is better we be honest than we soft soap things. One of our listeners asked a question about job descriptions and why would some employers opt to not give a job description? What's the point of not giving a job description?
Well, some employers believe that by not giving you a job description, it means that they could assign any duty and responsibility to you because there's nothing defined in black and white, right? So it's an employer who wants to basically get away with telling you today do this, telling you tomorrow do something else, and expect you to be fully competent at it too, and vex when you cannot effectively do it as well. That employer is not a very smart employer because job descriptions have value. Job descriptions it forms part of the contract that you have with an employee in terms of why you engage them in the role, what level of what they're expected to do in terms of the duties and responsibilities, the expected level of performance that is required, and it helps you now to manage that employee's performance. So in the absence of the job description, and you come and you tell me to go and market the company one day, and to come and do the financials the next day, and to come and do something operational, how could that even be a legitimate or a reasonable expectation? And should I now decide as a result of that, and then you're telling me I'm not performing, should I now decide to challenge you legally? I will be in a stronger position as the employee because you never defined what my duties and responsibilities were in the first place. So there's value to it. So I don't understand why an employer wouldn't want to have a job description because it helps manage performance. It helps with guarding. It protects the organization too and giving the employer a sense of what they were hired to do. So if they choose to do something else that compromises the organization. They hired me as in terms of HR, and I went and I do some other transaction that I wasn't even hired to do. Then they well within their right to deal with me accordingly. So to me, it's a form of protection for the organization.
Can the employee then give himself or herself a job description? So if in a situation somebody does that to you, they haven't given you a job description, can you then itemize, this is what I am prepared to do, and proffer that as a job description?
Well, I'm certain there will be conflict back and forth. That is a recipe for creating conflict in the workplace. They could do it, and the employer will say, "Well, no, I don't want you to only do that. I want you to drive the truck. I want you to go to the bank and run errands."
But
So
surely that
it's
must be illegal to hire somebody and not give them a job description. Is it illegal, or there's a
no,
gray
it's not
area?
illegal. It's
Okay.
not illegal. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I know the Ministry of Labor, at least when I served on a few committees, they were working on getting basic conditions in place legally, something like contracts of employment, for example. A lot of people don't even have contracts of employment in Aruda. They work, and it happens again in family businesses. The man down the street, daughter, looking for a job, he come to the boss, he say, "Hi, I'm a daughter." He say, "No problem." They have a conversation, the daughter come and the daughter starts to work. No contract, is all verbal, right? No job description, nothing in place. That is not illegal. The ministry now, at least a couple of years ago, I know they were examining putting some structure into all of this, the employment relationship now, and at least having basic things. Because there are a number of employees out there who don't have any entitlements. They're working for employers who don't grant them sick leave, who don't grant them vacation leave, right? They don't have time off. If they do stay home, it will be deducted from their salaries. These things do happen. And it's because you have a lot of things that are still unregulated and not in a, there's nothing governing it
Yeah.
in terms of that. So that's a gray area that needs to be addressed, and it happens especially in these small businesses or family managed and run organizations. It does.
So, do you ever, I mean, in your professional career seems to have been with a number of large organizations, but have you ever been in a position where you've been assisting family organizations to structure their human resource departments?
A couple of years ago, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, I did some consultancy work.
Mm-hmm.
And I did help a few organizations develop their policies and manuals, develop contracts of employment, job descriptions. So, yes, and I'm talking about organizations that had nothing in place at all. And the employees, it leads to a very disgruntled workforce and an unhappy workforce when there's no systems in place that will govern the employees, their terms and conditions, what is expected of them, that will create the kind of environment that will want an employee to stay with that organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I did help. I rolled out policies. I facilitated training. So I did that a couple of years ago. Yes, there's the concept of the gig economy now, Ruda,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of practitioners now. There are a lot of consultants now out there who could actually provide this kind of service to smaller organizations at a reduced cost,
Mm-hmm.
a retainer. A lot
Uh-huh.
of companies now, to me, who don't have structured HR departments could explore the concept of having a practitioner on retainer to provide them with that service. Hermat has a number of consultants within our registry that could provide that service as well. Because it's important. People don't understand that employers need the employees. A company is nothing without people, It's
Mm-hmm.
just a piece of paper registered back under the Companies Act
Mm-hmm.
and registered as a piece of paper. The reality is the people is what give life to the organization, and you cannot achieve your mandate without people, without the employees. And to me, in helping to create the right environment for you to be profitable, because people go into business to make money. I don't know anybody who registers and starts a business say they want a bus. They go into it to make money. So therefore, it to me is a no-brainer to create the right environment that will want people to produce and to develop and grow. And they will give to your organization, they'll be loyal to your organization if you create the right environment. And it's a mixture of tangible and intangible things. The intangible things include respect, as simple as that is, Rhoda. That goes a long way. Care and the concept of a duty of care. Your worker, a family member is COVID now, and an employer, when him asks you, you heard that the person had COVID, they when him ring you up and ask you how you're feeling, how you're doing. Employees have lost during this time. I know employees who've lost spouses, children. Up to today, I was talking to an employee. I
Mm-hmm.
called one of our employees because her sister passed away with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And that employee appreciated that phone call. And it's simple things that employees look for in that employment relationship, the concept of care. And that is why the duty of care is enshrined in law as well. So
And
therefore,
no, no, go ahead. You finish, and when you finish, I will ask my question.
so it's a number of things that is enshrined in this relationship called the employment relationship, not
Mm-hmm.
only trust and confidence, but other intangible things that will result and redound in the natural loyalty and commitment of your workforce if it's given to the worker.
So I want to ask this now because you talked about COVID and the impact of COVID. COVID has had a huge impact on work in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, the entire world. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about the Great Resignation. But the vaccine and vaccination policies, where are you on how human resource departments ought to be treating with that particular minefield?
Well, I'm glad you say minefield because that it is. I'll be honest. HR requires the support of the executive, the major decision makers in an organization
Mm-hmm.
to treat effectively with COVID. Thankfully, I say I'm blessed with that kind of support in my organization, and it's from the top, from the very top, to my CEO and to the executive team in terms of support for how we treat with COVID. So it's a collective and agreed response. So that alone gives you the confidence you need to do what you need to do to execute and to execute effectively, right? It meant, therefore, having a policy in place. It starts with a policy, and a documented one. And we introduce a documented one, for example. But for HR practitioners, I will encourage them to get the support. The company has to take a position because COVID is not going anywhere, Rhoda. That's just the reality.
It's not.
So, so we can't stay locked up forever. We need to produce. We need to have the economy growing again. Therefore, how do we strike that balance as it relates to COVID? Trade policies and procedures. Now, nationally, the government hasn't said mandatory vaccination, right? So, what do you do in a situation like that? You have to be very skillful now. It means communicating, it means reaching out, and it's a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, this is a lot of work. And I personally experienced it, right? Where you have all these meetings with the staff, starting off with the big conferences online, and you're sharing data and you're sharing videos, right? To actually, in some cases, depending on the company that you're working with, where they actually get involved with facilitating you to get access to vaccines. There was a time we didn't have the plethora of vaccines that we have now. So therefore, there were some employers, like if you look at the Supermarket Association, and for example, where you have an employer and through that representative body making arrangements for you to have access to vaccines. So therefore take advantage of it, right? So you have that element of it, besides information, telling you consult your doctor, giving you all the data that there is out there. Then those who are in a position to assist with the actual access to vaccines did that, right? Then there's the other element now. So we dealt with education, we dealt with access. We moved into also the physical environment now, recognizing that because there's a split in the workspace between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. How do you protect both? Because the duty of care is to everyone, right? So you may have a vaccinated employee saying that they're uncomfortable with an unvaccinated employee, and an unvaccinated employee saying the same thing about those who are vaccinated. How do you manage in an environment like that? So it's ensuring that all your OSH procedures are in place, all the health and safety systems are in place and working, and it's at a good cost to their company. People feel that when companies have to close their door for a day and we know that was happening with several organizations. When they had a close, they closed their doors, they sanitized. That wasn't cheap to do. The sanitizing, the loss of business and earnings for that one day, and the loss of operations. So companies have put out, and it has cost the companies. So my message would have always been, this is what we are doing to protect you. What are you doing to protect yourself? What are you doing to protect others, your family, and those around you as well? We have done this. This is what it's cost. We track the costs. So I could tell you what it costs. But what have you done? We have done our part. The duties on both our sides. People feel the OSH only have obligations on the employer. The OSH Act has obligations on the employee just the same as well. And when an employer is demonstrating that they're doing all that they can, and you are still not meeting them halfway, then depending on the environment and the nature of your operations, you may be forced to take certain actions. That is just the reality. Now, when we look at how the laws are evolving in other jurisdictions, we recognize that for some industries, that once you have more than 100 workers, Rhoda, they have made it mandatory for vaccination. Once you have more than 100 workers, right? So, and again, it's all about risk and risk assessment. Your environment may be one where, and you've said you've grown accustomed to staying home, and at the end of the day, you could function effectively through the use of technology. And therefore, if you chose not to be vaccinated, you're not posing a risk to somebody else because of how you function now. But there are some jobs and some industries that cannot work. And certainly the industry that I'm involved in is a lot of public interface and interaction. And there's a cost every single time there's a shutdown, and there's sanitization to be done, disruption in the workflow and all of that. That is a cost. So therefore, in assessing the risk, and to me, what I also did is encourage practitioners to do their risk assessments and have it on record. So you've identified all the risk areas for the transference of this virus and what measures you've put in place to it. And to me, at the end of the day, you could demonstrate that that is why now you need this policy, because you have done so much, and this now is required of you as the employee now to meet me halfway. And what I've described is more than halfway, that
Yes,
the employer has done is more than halfway.
agreed. I mean, I've been looking at the ongoing issue with Republic Bank and Republic Bank's policy. I looked at the policy. I thought the policy was quite fair. Having read it through and seeing what they were offering the employee and how they were allowing employees to get themselves organized before having to come back out to the world of work. So I was a little bit surprised when I saw a person saying that they felt that the policy was unfair. But I like the angle that you've gone with there, that the employer has to show this is how far we are going to make the space safe for you. What are you now prepared to do to continue to make this space safe for you and for the rest of your colleagues? Now, I got vaccinated, even though I'm working from home. But my one of my concerns, especially, week after week, you're looking at what is taking place with infection rates and spikes here, and what deaths are looking like. My concern is that if I had to go back out into the physical space, it's a number of things. I multiple concerns now. One, the traffic. I Having worked from home for more than 20 months, that extra time not sitting in something stressful like traffic, I don't know that I want to experience that again. I also don't know that I want to even have to experience inter-office conflict, because I'm not experiencing any of that at home. All right, my office is an office of one person, and all of my interaction will be taking place either via email or phone calls, that sort of thing. So for me, there are a number of considerations with respect to going back into a physical workspace, especially since I am in a position to do what I need to do virtually. If it was a situation where I couldn't do it virtually, then obviously I would be more amenable to going back into a physical workspace. But I'm comfortable doing what I do virtually. That aside, I've been looking at trends in other parts of the world, and there's this thing going on in the United States called the Great Resignation. And this is the last point I want to touch on, and then we're going to wrap things up. Do you think something like that, and let me explain to the audience what it is. There are a number of persons in the light of the pandemic, they've just decided that they don't want to return to their physical workspace. Having worked virtually for, a year or more than a year, with the return after, vaccination levels increased, with the return of persons back out into the workspace, there are a number of persons they've just decided, no, we don't want to do this anymore. And they've resigned. So, Cavelle, in your professional experience, do you think something like that could happen in Trinidad and Tobago?
No.
No,
No.
I don't think so.
No, you see, our environment, our culture, our environment is very different to the United States, right?
Uh-huh.
And what drove the Great Resignation, or the Big Quit, that is the
Yes,
other
yeah,
thing
that
that they
was the
call
other
it,
term for
right?
it, the big quit. Yeah.
Right? You see, people like the flexibility and the mobility and the freedom that they had, and as you've rightly identified, you've gained from this not having to deal with traffic and conflict in the workspace and all of that. Great, right? A lot of our
Let's not
jobs,
forget that I can do what I need to do virtually.
correct, and I'm going to say a number of jobs, especially in my environment, that cannot be done in that way, right?
Yes, yeah.
And people have to come out, they have to interact, they have to be on sites, they have to work, right? However, in terms of our environment, where we do not have enough jobs that will facilitate what you do, we don't have sufficient jobs to facilitate that flexibility that in the US, people are leaving. They support it through social measures that I put in place as well. So they have at least 2 years where they could be receiving a grant before they actually return to the workspace. Plus the availability and the technology and the variety of jobs that exist, the different classification of jobs that exist, it's different to our environment. what has to happen here for us is the retooling and the reskilling of the workforce, recognizing that COVID has shifted the workspace. We are going to have a hybrid system. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
So you're still going to have that flexi arrangement in place. So it means we now have to reskill our workforce. And maybe COVID will usher in a new sector because the government has said digitization. Everybody's talking digitization. So it means new careers, new fields, people are now getting accustomed to the technology, embracing it, getting comfortable with it. But I have not been physically to a bank in over a year, going on
I
2 years
know,
myself,
right?
right?
It's amazing. It is
Yes,
amazing. The
yes.
number of things that my bank can suddenly allow me to do virtually. I'm enjoying it.
Yes. So a number of things have shifted and we have gotten on board with learning. But as employers, we have to retool and reskill our workers. The education system have to do that as well too and prepare people for new careers and new jobs. But the reality is we do not have the availability of that work. So people choosing to resign, I don't know where they will be going to be honest, because we do not have that variety of careers and options that will allow you that flexibility that you're looking for. It could be a temporary fix, but it's not going to be a permanent fix until our economy is more diversified. It
I
has more
I'm in
technology
agreement.
careers, right?
I'm in
So we,
agreement with you. I'm in
yeah, we're not
agreement with you.
diversified enough. Yeah.
First,
So
for something like the Great Resignation to occur here, there need to be a couple new sectors that would allow for persons to transition into those sectors, and it would also have to be sectors that are probably more virtual in nature or more digital in nature
yes.
to allow for the Great Resignation or the big quit to be taking place in any significant way here.
But what I
And
will say to you is this before we move on from this point,
sure.
what you're going to have is migrancy, though. That's a real issue for us, especially for those professionals who have lost jobs, because we have a lot of professionals on the market. And in chatting with a number of people, I know people are exploring options internationally as well.
So
So
brain
what are you going
drain.
to Correct. So that is what I was coming to next. You're going to have a brain drain, which is different to the Great Resignation, and that could never be good for us.
Yep.
So we really need to get those sectors going again, and we need to have a more diversified economy, and we need to retool and reskill our workforce. That's why NTA, I mean, I will champion the work that NTA does, because at the end of the day, NTA is saying to the general workforce that instead of everybody focusing on particular careers and professions, doctor, lawyer, the
The
ones that people
traditionals,
like,
the
yes, the
traditional ones.
traditional. You have to now look at other skills. And Rhoda, pretty soon you'll be hard pressed to find a good electrician, a good plumber, a good fabricator, right? Because we are not telling the young generation that it's okay to have a career and you could actually earn and make a living and have a good life
Well,
by pursuing those
I
careers.
had a conversation with the Minister of Education, and I also had a conversation with the Minister of Labor. And there may have been at least a couple other ministers that I've interviewed here, and I've raised the issue of technical vocational training and
Yes.
how heartbroken I am that it's no longer pushed in the way in which it used to be pushed at the secondary level, because I
Yeah.
see a whole new market emerging for persons with those kinds of skills, whether it's
Yes.
electrical work or plumbing work or welding. Then I'm seeing a whole new market for persons
Yeah.
with those skills.
Yeah, and let's not even get into robotics. And we
Yes.
have actually a percentage of students who are quite good at it in Trinidad and Tobago. And when you look at what NIHUS is doing as well too, so we do have some state entities that actually doing the work in pursuing, but I don't think it's enough. It's sufficient that will lend itself to industries being set up at this stage.
Not
Um,
industries, no, but you were talking about the gig economy before. And the
mhm.
way I see it, in some instances, once persons have these skills, what they really need is like some seed capital to be able to get
Yes.
themselves the equipment or whatever, and then they can start it as a small enterprise, whether it's a small micro enterprise, and function within the gig economy. So you get jobs here, you get jobs there, and eventually you're in a position where you have enough jobs that you're providing yourself with a very solid income on a monthly basis or on an annual basis.
But the only challenge I see with that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Mia Motley addressed it so nicely when she dealt with the financial sector in Barbados,
Mm-hmm.
is that we do have financial institutions in this country that don't take risk. There's no real venture capital. So I may have a fantastic idea. I may be very good at robotics or something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exploring artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence is impacting my profession as well,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, we are saying to a generation who might be interested in technology and different types of technology, that yeah, we need to look at this for the future. But yet, when they come out and they have their ideas and they want to pursue it, the financial sector is sending a different message to them. You spoke
You,
about seed
you know
capital.
who our biggest venture capitalist is in the country?
Who?
NEDCO, so the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. That's our
But
biggest venture capitalist. We don't have you. I mean, you're being very polite. Our private sector is risk averse. They don't invest in new areas and new sectors. They don't do it. So if somebody wants a small loan, then the options they have are, if they've got money saved in a credit union somewhere, if that happened to happen for them, then they can go to the credit union and borrow against that and use that to set up a job. If they don't have that kind of money, then they can go to NEDCO and go with a proposal and submit the proposal to NEDCO and try to access funding again
yeah,
from the government. But venture capitalism and people investing in fledgling ideas in that way, it doesn't happen. It really doesn't
yeah,
happen. I mean, I got into what I do as a consultant really accidentally, right? Somebody reached out to me, they needed assistance with something, and I was like, okay, sure, no problem. I did it. I charged for it, and then I realized, oh, okay, all right, this is something that I can do, not 24/7, not 40 hours a week, but it's something that I can do, and I can build on it. And I did that, but I had to do it with my own money the entire time,
yeah,
because you can't go to somebody and say, okay, all right, I would like money to be able to set myself up in this way, and to be able to invest in this, invest in that. And no, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in that way here. And those are
yeah.
some of the challenges, I think, as smaller economies, and smaller economies with very traditional notions about jobs and what jobs are and how you employ yourself. Those are some of the issues that we have to transcend. My final question for you is based on a point that you made earlier on. And before, yeah, I asked the question and you answered the question, I want to be able to say this. It has been very interesting listening to you talk.
Oh, thank you.
You
Thanks so
made
much.
HR sound very excited. Now I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, how come I didn't know HR sounding like a real sexy area to get into, right?
Somebody told me that when I lectured records, critical HR records management, that I made records management sexy.
Good. That is a great sign. It is a good sign. It is a good sign, Cavell. So you talked about how a blended approach, a mixed approach to work, that's the wave of the future. Tell me how you see that working, and what do you think would be some of the key initiatives that HR practitioners would have to engage in for that to make that transition into a blended approach?
Well, the thing is, at the very top level, you have to get support, and we have to always make the case for the benefits. There's always a business case you have to make for anything that you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a sound business case, Rhoda, for embracing the hybrid way going forward. There's significant cost savings to an organization if organizations were to review their contracts of employment and look at the terms that they have in those contracts of employment. There are people comfortable just like yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and there can be jobs that can be done quite comfortably from home where it doesn't cost you office space, it doesn't cost you the technology that is needed in terms of the internet service and all of that, and it wouldn't cost you in certain allowances that you would pay to a traditional to an employee in a traditional setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So travel allowances, meal allowances, subsistence, all these things out the window.
Clothing, right? That sort of thing.
Yes, all those things out, right? So therefore, there's significant benefits, and you have to build a business case, and that's what HR has to be skillful at. Put in dollars and cents. HR is always accused of being too touchy-feely and softy-softy, right? And we're not good with numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I told you I did economics, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's why I'm a little bit different,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you have to build your business case first and foremost. And why to me I would pitch that to an employer is because yes, there are jobs that the people they don't really need to come into the office. You can make it based on deliverables. You pay people based on what they deliver. That way, sick leave, vacation leave, gratuity, all those things, you could shape your employment contracts in such a way that is really based on deliverables. You could have different types of contracts in the workplace. You have to become skillful at the contracts now. And to me, COVID should have opened HR eyes because we had to deal with furlough.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody understood that concept before. The court said to us, 3 months is the maximum, based on a judgment, the maximum they are willing to accept in terms of temporary layoff.
Mm-hmm.
Tell that to IMAX and Gemstone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Tell that to them who had to be closed based on regulations. They didn't create this thing for themselves. So if you're telling me it's only 3 months, what do I do after that,
And
right? Then
daycares, because daycares have been closed the entire
correct.
time.
So tell that to all these businesses that were closed for more than 3 months. So then it now becomes a total separation, a retrenchment, which retrenchment means now is benefits you have to pay. The same company that closed that not making any money now have to find money to pay separation packages because that's what the court will tell you is the reasonable thing to do. You could choose not to do it, the worker take it to court and then you battle it out for however long there, right? But the fact is that is what the system provides. So to me, with your contracts and again measuring risk because that's what it is and transferring liability and risk to somebody else. So to me, I would embrace the new workspace to look at different ways of engaging people that will allow a lot of flexibility that
Mm-hmm.
allows people to develop other skill sets that to me creates diversity in your economy as well because these same people have other skills that they utilize it during COVID. I mean, I've discovered so many Instagram businesses, Rhoda, because I
Mm-hmm.
tell my staff every week, choose one small business and go and support. They will hear me say that in the office all the time. Go and purchase something because you are working, you are not
Mm-hmm.
affected. You have a duty to support somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I discovered a lot of small businesses via Instagram.
Same.
And these, right. So therefore, it means these are people who had traditional work, or they were in a traditional environment. And because of what happened to them, they had to turn a skill
Yes.
into a
They
business,
pivoted.
right?
Many people
Correct.
pivoted. Mm-hmm.
Correct. So therefore, to me, if you embrace the hybrid system, it can lend itself to diversity in your economy. Other new businesses pulling up because you could engage people contractually differently. Then it could help save costs, rental costs, and all of that. I have a number of friends who have businesses said they are not going to rent spaces anymore. Right? It gives way to other new businesses popping up and all of that. Well, to me, I see benefits to all of this. Now, again, some industries cannot afford that. So rest assured that there's some sectors that is not going to happen altogether because of the nature of their business and their job. So you have to know your business to know what will work for you and what will not work for you. If you're a consultant and your job takes you to the company's place of work, whether you're doing audits or whatever it may be, then why do you need a big fancy building in Port of Spain to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Just look at the issues around the risk around it now. So your protection with your data, the technology issues, the OSH issues. Look at ways now to contractually protect yourself against those things, but it will have long-term benefits to engage in it. So that's the way I see it, and to me, that is the way of the future. And it also redounds to society. Rhoda, whether we like it or not, there's a real reason why we have issues in family life. Both parents hustling out there and not spending enough time with children, no
Mm-hmm.
support, no childcare solutions in the workplace. And to me, I've advocated long ago, so I'll use your platform to do it tonight again, where to me it's a no-brainer for having a tax incentive for employers who have childcare solutions in the workplace. The same way we do it for sports. Yeah, have employers who invest in sports and they get tax concessions for that. The same way we do it for training because there are tax concessions around that.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we have that for something which is a bedrock of society, family and family life?
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of single mothers and they have real issues with childcare solutions. So if an employer were to choose to give up how much square foot to have a daycare or after school care service in their company and get a tax break just for having that, that will lend itself to allow women, and look at what the data is showing. Demographically, women comprise the majority of the workforce
You
now.
know, it's one
So
of
there,
that's one of the things that I had an argument with some tutor reps in a couple of years ago, because you know they have their elections, and they came, and you know they would have been pitching themselves as we're the group to vote for, blah blah blah. And I said, no group of persons are tackling for me intangible benefits, and one critical intangible benefit. You go to any school, the majority of the workforce are women. The majority of the teaching for staff will be female. It will be more female than male. And of course, you know, females within a home situation, they're the ones that tend to be responsible for looking after the children. And we don't have daycare systems attached to schools that would allow parents, women who have children, to have adequate daycare for the child. And
yeah,
so you're preaching to the choir here about this, because for
yeah,
me it goes beyond the school. You have all of these government ministries, and all of these government ministries with big new fancy buildings, and in planning the layout and structure of these buildings, many, if not all of those buildings, did not factor in having a cafeteria in the building and having daycare in the building. So that way they could control what people are consuming. So, you know, they have access to good food, and they also have access to daycare facilities for their children. For the life of me, I don't understand how we could be in the 21st century, right? We left a century 21 years ago. We're in a new century now, and these things are not factored in. And the unions, I felt the unions should have been spearheading that.
advocating for it.
They
Yeah,
should have been advocating for that. So
yeah.
last year there would have been PSA elections last year, and I had that election had about 6 different slates, and I had members of all of the slates come, and I'm talking to them, and I'm trying to hear, what are the new ideas? We're in the midst of a pandemic. What are the new ideas that they have to present to the workers, to present to the workforce? Nothing. They're still talking about bargaining arrangements and collective arrangements and salary increases from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but nothing new. And the thing about it is, the new things that I am talking about there are things that should have been put in place centuries now,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we've always had women. Women have always been having children. We have always
correct.
had to eat, and people need to eat properly to be able to function properly at their workplaces. And something as basic as childcare in government ministries, and a proper food canteen within government ministries, that is not a consideration. Or a gym.
Well, I'll be fair and say the Attorney General's office
Okay. I
does
was
have
not aware.
daycare.
I was not aware.
Yeah, and also the OPM as well too.
Okay, that's good to know.
And just before the pandemic, they had opened the OPM had opened the after school care and all of that. But then the pandemic came as well too,
Okay.
where staff could have had, the parents pick up the children and they could come and do homework and all of that. So at least I know for certain those two ministries have it,
Okay, good. Well,
right?
I'm happy to hear that. But let me
But
let
it's
you finish. Let me let you finish.
but it's just something that I'm very passionate about, mainly because to me it's a no-brainer, and as you rightly said, to me the demographics is there already to support it, and it's one of the issues we're having when it comes to family life and the issues around children and the behaviors we're seeing as well too. At the end of the day, it's not the same where you had generations of people, the village raising the child. Now that concept is no longer the same, especially when you have younger grandparents now, so they want to be out and about just the same way too. So it means we have to find other ways to support our employees while they work. And to me, you will have a lot of peace of mind. These same employees will have peace of mind knowing that their child on the fourth floor, the fifth floor, and at lunchtime you can run down
You
and
could dip down and check on the
yeah, and,
child.
and make sure and check in, right? It's the same way where we recognize that because of biology, women have to breastfeed, anatomy and nursing mother's room, all these little things that we take for granted. A woman has to pump,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's no
Mm-hmm.
space that allows for that in the workspace as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all these little things that makes a difference in the mind of an employee. And the fact is, we want to encourage, we keep saying, the population, how long we hearing about 1.3, 1.4 million, the population not growing. We hearing all the concerns about NIB and NIS and the lack of contributions and what it will mean for me when I eventually reach retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing in the kitty, right? So these are things you'd want to encourage people to have children and encourage family life. But if there's no support systems in place because things have become so expensive that it requires both parents to be working. It's not like long time where a parent stayed home, two parents working, and in some cases, it's single parents. And not let us not discount the fathers who have primary care for kids as well too. They might be in minority, but it exists and they benefit from it just the same way. So let's factor all these things in shaping the new workforce because it's all part. I mean, we spend 8 hours out of 24 hours. That is the minimum. For
Yeah.
me, it's like 10 to 12
Mm-hmm.
on a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
But 8 hours minimum. And it's your waking most productive day time in the day, right? So this environment should be one that you should be happy to go to when you get up in the morning. The workspace should be one where you're happy to go because there's a lot of time you're spending there.
Mm-hmm.
And employers have to factor that in when they reshape the space now. So it's not only about COVID, but it's also what the data is showing you. And you will know the data. You will know what percentage of your workforce are women, the age group, the potential for childbearing, all these things. The data is there. We have all the data.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, we can plan based on data. And that's why I'm saying business cases could be made. That is what HR needs to now do. Make a business case for some of these things as well. And to me, the government from that level should offer, honestly, I think, a tax concession for any employer giving up square footage for a child, a daycare service in their workspace. If it's contributory or not as well too, because the employee would more than be willing to contribute for something like this, knowing that the child is right there physically.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just to round off that part of the conversation this evening. Yes.
Cavell, I want to thank you. I've taken up more time than I'd asked you for. I asked you for an hour and I've had you here for an hour and a half. So thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us this evening. And we hope to have you back because I feel like there's so much more that we need to cover.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. In fact, this is my first interview since I became president of
Really?
HUMAT. So you are my first.
And
So thank
we
you.
didn't even get around to talking about what your plans are for HRMATT. How do you pronounce it? HUMAT?
HUMAT, yes,
All
the
right.
acronym,
All right.
the Human Resource Management
As the new president, what
Association.
was like, the top three things you want to effect?
Rhoda, we have so many plans. The first meeting we had as a board focused on strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think practitioners have a lot to be excited about coming forward. With not giving away too much, there's a lot centered around. We dissected, let me put it this way, in strategically planning for what we're going to do, we dissected our industry.
Mm-hmm.
We have young upcoming HR practitioners, recently graduated entry level HR practitioners. We have mid level practitioners, we have mature, seasoned professionals, we have those who are now consulting because they've come out of the mainstream workforce and consulting. And we have our founders, the visionaries like Gordon Draper and Anthony Watkins, who actually formed this association.
Mm-hmm.
We dissected and we have something for everybody. Hermat was accused of just rolling out training and toolkits, and as a senior practitioner, I don't need this training at all you're offering me.
Mm-hmm.
There are other things we could do. So you're going to see a lot more visibility. You're not going to see HR. We are going to be advancing HR being at the seat where decisions are being made. So recently, our treasurer was
Mm-hmm.
appointed to the GATE committee, the GATE review
I
committee.
saw that.
Um, right. We have another member who is being appointed pretty soon to a charitable organization. We want to make sure that organizations have HR at that level. Rhoda boards sit and make decisions, and decisions impact employees. And if you examine board constitution, you would see a number of them don't have HR practitioners on the board.
Which
We
is
want to
why
advance that.
Which is why I was really glad to see that Maxine Atong had been assigned to the Police Service Commission, because I'm very focused on that service commission because of the impact the choices they make will have on a wider society. So I was very
Yeah.
happy. I was very happy to see the selections for the most recent police service commission.
And that is what we need to promote. Because again, strategically, when organizations are making key decisions, it's people to execute these decisions.
Yes.
So Hermat will now be promoting and advancing representation at that level for our members. I think our members should be very excited come next year in terms of some of the discussions and the people that we bring in to speak, because it's all about the future. That's the reality. And to me, the last 2 years, in addition to just battling COVID, employers should have been strategically planning for their organizations. I know our organization did, right? You have to plan for life after this, life during this, and we can't sit down and just let things happen to us.
Agreed.
And HR, right? So it's a number of things to be excited about that you will hear pretty soon. But thank you for at least giving me the opportunity to give a little glimpse into what will be coming.
No,
Things
you're-
to even honor and
very-
appreciate those.
You're very welcome,
who-
because I think
yeah.
you helped me to understand much better, in a much deeper way, the importance of HR within an organization. So I feel like we're gonna light a fire on the HR at the UWI after this interview. No, I'm going in the backside now. Listen to me. I spoke to Cavelle, right? And all your support, boom, 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 boom. So make me feel better about life. So Cavelle, thank you so much for your time this evening. Have a great
And
weekend.
thank you for having me.
Not a
Thank
problem
you.
at all. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So, folks, that was Cavelle St Joseph-Omer, who is the current president of HERMAT, the Human Resource Managers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and she herself is a human resource practitioner. So I hope you all enjoyed and learned a lot about HR and HR practices, and certainly HR practices in this new pandemic era where, we're shifting from the physical workspace to a virtual workspace and probably having to move forward with a blended approach, part physical, part virtual. Sunday, meet me right back here at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking about the impact of World War II on crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Remember the week before when we talked about Boise Sing? Well, this Sunday we're going to be talking about World War II, 1941 all the way down to a little after after 1947. World War II ended in 1945, but we would have ended up with a little bit more impact because the Americans stayed here and had a base here for a period of time. So join me and one of my favorite historians, I think our favorite historian, Dr. Lovell Francis, is going to be joining us from South Africa. And we're going to be talking about the impact of World War II on crime, the culture of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm looking forward to that. Have yourselves a good evening.